Expulsion Prevention, what is it and why does it matter? A GLE presented by Teen Wolfpack, which includes Cassie, Cheryl, Christina, Nadir, Rebecca, and C. Here, we're going to go through our Bright Spark mission, which is to nurture and sustain child-centered, anti-racist early learning communities. I'd like to do a quick land acknowledgement before we start our presentation. Here, we would like to take a moment to recognize and honor the original occupants of the land we reside and gather on and who we are still here today. We would like to acknowledge the stolen land of the Coast Salish people that we are currently occupying the land. And we also acknowledge the forced labor of enslaved Africans that our country and institutions are built upon. At Bright Spark, we stand against all forms of racism, and we ask that you stand with us to end racism in all its forms.
Okay, so we will start by talking about the definition of what suspension, soft expulsion, and expulsion are. They all three are different ways that childcare providers tell families and children to leave and or find a different childcare provider. And while these can happen for several different types of reasons, the most common reason is for a child's perceived behavior challenges. So a suspension is the temporary removal of a child by a child care provider. For example, something happens and they say that you can't come back for the rest of the week. That is a suspension. A soft expulsion are practices by a child care provider that make the child and or the family feel unwelcome or that make the child care arrangement unworkable. For example, if a child care provider routinely and regularly calls a parent saying the child's behavior is acting up, you need to come pick them up today early. If that keeps happening, the parent might not be able to do this for their job and they're not feeling welcome. Therefore, they will look for a different child care arrangement. And lastly, expulsion is the permanent removal of a child from a child care program.
All right. So why do children get expelled? Well, typically, a child is expelled from a program because of what is deemed as challenging behavior. They tend to fall in these two categories. One, disruptive behavior, such as not sitting at circle, not following teachers' instructions, not participating in regular classroom activities, or not standing in line properly. Two is aggressive behavior, such as hitting, biting, throwing toys, strong emotions when it comes to sharing. But why does this happen? Next slide. And why is it happening so frequently at this age? Now, there are many factors that go into this. One of them being teachers may misunderstand and identify normal age-appropriate behavior as challenging or disruptive behavior. Not wanting to sit still is normal for a child. Not always wanting to participate or engaging is not always behavioral issues. It could be that the lesson is not age appropriate or it's not intriguing enough to capture the child's attention. We were just at a teachers meeting a few days ago where we had to do clap, 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 clap to get everyone's attention. And at every table, there were fidget toys and things that keep teachers distracted. So we have an understanding that there are a lot of different types of learners, and sometimes it's hard to stay still, even as an adult. So we got to have realistic expectations for children as well. Number two, classroom conditions. High teacher to child ratios have a huge effect on a teacher's ability to manage a classroom and to deal effectively with children who display challenging behaviors. You can be a great teacher, have all the experience, but if you are overwhelmed and there's a situation that requires you to have one-on-one attention or close 2 and 3 group attention, and you are there with 1 to 10 ratio, you cannot always address every situation. Sometimes not having the resources or the correct staffing can lead to these behaviors manifesting. I'll give you guys an example. It could be a situation where a teacher is at circle time teaching a lesson. There's a student to his right trying to communicate to the teacher, but it's out of the visibility of the teacher. Few minutes have passed, and the student has become a little bit frustrated, has given up trying to communicate to the teacher. Something else happens, other things happen, and now there's a conflict with that child and another student. Now the teacher notices, and now the teacher will see and only see that, oh, this is behavior happening. But sometimes having the correct ratio, having enough teachers, having enough people in the classroom, you'll be able to notice and address all those needs, and things that flare up and end up becoming what's deemed as behavior can be addressed early on just by addressing a need. I feel like this next one kind of connects together too. Early childhood programs have limited resources and capacity to support staff. Having the education and the skills to be able to deal with the type of behavior and to deal with stressful situations and to have the correct tools to be able to communicate with the students goes a long way. And sometimes not having the staffing or even having the resources to train your teachers and to put them in the best position to succeed will lead them to seeing students and viewing other things as challenging behaviors when they might not be. The last one is implicit bias, having unconscious negative beliefs. This may affect how students are viewed. Teachers may unknowingly view particular students as more difficult. This may lead them to respond more often with harsh consequences. I want to give you guys one example of my own implicit bias. And this is with an animal growing up. I have this bitter opinion of rabbits. I grew up with everyone loving and thinking rabbits are very cute. I had the complete opposite feelings about rabbits, but that was because I grew up in my childhood. We had an apartment where we had to share a room with another family, and that family had rabbits living in the apartment, and that rabbit would often attack me, would do a lot of negative things to me that gave me this experience for me to have this opinion towards rabbits. And I had this implicit bias all the time. Anytime we would view animals and everyone's like, oh, this rabbit's cute, I didn't think of that way at all. So everyone has some sort of implicit bias. It's how you address and how you look at your bias and not try to bring it into the classroom.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about, we're talking about expulsion prevention, and we're going to talk about what does licensing say about the matter, because there are 2 sections in the licensing WACs that address expulsion. The first one is WAC 110-300-0340, and it says to promote consistent care and maximize opportunities for child development and learning, an early learning provider must develop and follow exclusion policies and practices. So we challenge you as we read through these WACs to go beyond the WACs. Our opinion is that it's a great addition when they last redid the WACs that they included expulsion in the law, but we would like to challenge you to go further, because the WAC does state that an early learning provider may expel a child if there is a serious safety concern due to behavior, and if the program is not able to reduce or eliminate that safety concern. If a child is expelled, however, it is the requirement of the program to review the expulsion policy with the parent or guardian of the child. They also need to record the parent or guardian, or to provide a record about the expulsion and the steps that were taken to avoid the expulsion. There needs to be details in this record, including date, time, the staff that were involved, details of each incident, and provide information for the family of where they can go next. So if you are thinking of expelling a child, having a plan in place that doesn't leave the family high and dry is what the WAC says to do. Also, which from what I am hearing from some licensors does not happen very often, is that the early learning provider must report to your licensor when you expel a child. And you can see here, I won't read through all of it, but there are information that must be provided to your licensor each time that this happens. And I said in the beginning, all early learning providers must develop and follow an expulsion policy. The next WAC is about that expulsion policy. So the policy must be very specific and provide examples of behavior that could lead to expulsion, the steps you would take to avoid expelling the child, how you would communicate to the parents or guardians of the child, and include information that may benefit a child, including community-based resources. Once again, the purpose of our series on expulsion and prevention is to push yourself past these WACs, to not expel children, and to really learn more about why it is harmful, and to look for other community resources, your coaches, and other resources to help you help the child, help the family, so that expulsion does not happen.
All right, so now we're going to look at policies and the records review tool. Part of preventing expulsion in your program is to have clear policies around this topic. When creating a policy to prevent expulsion, you want to be as clear as possible. Some things to think about when looking over your policies or creating a new policy are to think about the importance of having this policy. What is the why behind the policy? What is your current expulsion policy? And does it effectively serve the families and children in your care, or do you think it needs to be revised to better meet the needs of your families and children? Does your current policy support children when having challenging behaviors? What supports do you offer in the classroom to support challenging behavior? Does it talk about what training and resources staff take around behavioral, developmental support, and trauma-informed care of children? How often will you take these trainings? Does your policy talk about what you will do if challenging behaviors persist? What supports do you offer? What outside resources and professional do you leverage? How and when do you contact these resources and/or professionals? And so the policies pertaining to suspension and expulsion and preventing it are in the records review tool, or the RRT. There are 3 of them, and this goes beyond the WAC. This is more about preventing it entirely. So to meet this criteria, you'll need to do the first part, which is preventing suspension and expulsion 1. And that means that is a policy supports children with behavioral challenges and developmental needs through family partnerships, staff training, and consultation. The second one is the staff have annual training to support positive and social and emotional development, reducing challenging behaviors, and trauma-informed care. The last one is the staff can consult with a mental health consultant, coach, or professional, or for behavioral or developmental concerns. You might not have these in place. If this is something that you would like to put in place, there is definitely more guidance in the records review tool guide. And then there's also a set of blueprints that will help you write your policy entirely. This is something that you can find in Coaching Companion, and it's also something that you can get support from your coach with.
Thank you, Christina. Next, we're going to speak more about implicit bias and the role it plays in expulsions and suspensions in the classroom. So implicit biases are the unconscious attitudes and stereotypes that influence our perceptions and behaviors without our awareness. Studies suggest that implicit racial bias among early childhood educators might contribute to the disproportionate application disciplinary actions towards certain groups. An implicit bias can also lead to setting different behavioral expectations for various groups of children. And that's based off of how you perceive their behavior is, and whether it be threatening behavior or non-threatening behavior is based off of your cultural perceptions on that basic behavior that you're seeing. So research suggests that children of color, particularly Black boys, are scrutinized more intensely in classroom settings. And the studies that they're referring to is the eye gaze study, where they tested a group of teachers and showed them a classroom of children doing the same behavior, and they asked them to look at the child doing the challenging behavior. And he had special glasses that could track your eye movement, and the movement for a majority of the teachers went to the Black children, even though all the children were exhibiting the same behavior and none of the behavior was challenging. So that's where they're getting this information from, and it's just for us to be more mindful in how we are, viewing our children and the biases that we may carry. This can lead to overreactions to minor behavior issues and a higher likelihood of receiving disciplinary actions for those children compared to their peers. So implicit biases can lead to a lack of understanding of cultural norms and expressions. Behaviors considered typical in a child's cultural background might be misconstrued as disruptive by an educator unaware of those norms. So this can happen. To address that, you can have alternative disciplinary approaches, focusing on positive behavior interventions and support such as conflict resolution strategies, as well as social emotional learning programs, can provide effective alternatives to suspensions and expulsions, and also help you to create an equitable environment in your classroom, because you're focusing on the positive behaviors. This will include implicit bias training, continue these conversations, and equipping the educators with trainings on unconscious bias can help them recognize their own biases and mitigate their influence on decision making in the classroom. And then also having culturally responsive practices by promoting cultural competency among educators allows them to better understand and respond to diverse needs of the children and the behaviors of students from various backgrounds. So what we can also do is to address that within our classroom and environments is examine your assumptions, do a lot of self-reflection on your own background and how that can affect you and provide implicit bias. Seek feedback from your colleagues or from other professionals that you trust. Discuss implicit bias with your colleagues as well as the providers that you're working with, and continue that discussion, because it's a continuous work that you have to do in order to make sure that you're on top of that and addressing it. So it's not just a one-shot type of thing, it's a continuous education. Incorporate conversations about diversity and inclusion into your curriculum. So having books, discussions about different cultures and identities, and encourage the children to celebrate their own uniqueness, and that can allow them to learn that as well, so that they can address their own biases at a young age. And always be open to feedback from the families. If they have something to add or if they have some concerns, be there to listen, to hear what they have to say. Actively challenge your own biases, being mindful of the language that you use. Some language that may be acceptable at a certain time might not be acceptable now. So be, like I said, open to feedback and be mindful of the things that you say. Provide diverse representation, making sure all children of all abilities and backgrounds are represented within your classroom. Use inclusive teaching practices, understand that people have multiple intelligence and multiple ways of learning styles, and just being mindful and respectful of that as well. Intervene when you see bias within your colleagues as well as within your children. Always be prepared for those teachable moments and seek professional development. There's always things available at Bright Spark. We have trainings that can get stars hours for implicit bias, as well as at our PD Institute. There'll be some more trainings for that as well. So those are ways that we can address implicit bias, and those are the roles it plays within expulsion and suspensions in our classrooms.
All right, so now I'm gonna talk about trauma and how it relates to expulsion in a preschool classroom. So typically when a child is removed from the classroom, it is due to behaviors that are difficult for teachers to manage. When we are looking at a child's behavior, we need to look at what the behavior is telling us. For children who have experienced trauma, it often shows up in their behavior. In many situations, you will see the behavior before you will ever know that a child has experienced some form of trauma, unless the child's caregiver has shared that knowledge with you. For a young child in an early learning setting, their trauma can directly affect how they interact within your classroom and with others, even in the care of a kind and loving caregiver. When a young child has experienced trauma, their sense of safety can feel threatened, even in a safe situation, which is when you may see certain behaviors come out. So some trauma responses might look like crying and difficulty to soothe, hitting, kicking, punching, throwing things, running out of the room or away from any caregiver. There may be other behaviors that accompany trauma that show up in other ways. Some other examples of behavior are regression in basic skills such as sleeping, potty training, and eating, an increased level of fear, a change in their mood such as listlessness, physical complaints of pain, as well as self-blame. It is the behaviors described above, the crying and the hitting and the throwing of things, that causes children to be expelled, suspended, or sent home, which is soft expulsion. So it is important to reframe your mindset about what is actually happening to better meet this child's needs in any given situation. Because for a child that has experienced trauma, that can become compounded with the repeated expulsion, which only makes things worse for the child and their family. In these moments, a young child is struggling and needs the support of a caring adult. For a young child, behavior is communication, and it is very important to always keep this in mind as we engage with young children. Exposure to trauma quite literally alters and rewires a young child's brain. Children may have trouble focusing as their main priority is to remain safe. This is a protective factor all people have, as it serves to heighten awareness so that we can stay safe. When a child is in a constant state of fear due to trauma, they can be very quick to anger and are often perceived as disrespectful or defiant. When a child is showing these kinds of behaviors, their nervous system is not regulated and they need help from a caring adult to bring them back to a regulated state.
So next we're going to talk about the long-term effects of expulsion. High-quality childcare programs provide positive experiences that nurture long-term positive learning and development. In contrast, the practice of expulsion can influence a number of adverse outcomes across the child's development, health, and education. The practice of expulsion can have both immediate and long-term negative effects on both children and families. Through expulsion prevention, we can prevent these negative outcomes and nurture positive experiences for children. So some of the long-term effects on children. The beginning years of any child's life are critical for building an early foundation of learning, health, and wellness needed for success in school and adulthood. During these early years, children's brains are developing rapidly, influenced by the experiences they share within their interactions with families, caregivers, teachers, peers, and communities, both positive and negative. These early years set the trajectory for their relationships and success they will experience for the rest of their lives, making it critical that children's earliest experiences truly foster and not harm their development. Research on adverse childhood experiences has raised awareness on the impact of early trauma on childhood development and possible effects on children's physical and mental health. With this knowledge, expulsion in early childhood settings, which is a very stressful and negative experience for young children and their families, that young children and their families may encounter in early childhood programs, should be prevented and ultimately eliminated. Early childhood expulsion impacts and interrupts a child's sense of security, social acceptance, and academic routines. In the long run, these negative effects of early childhood expulsion can play out in middle and secondary education settings, future employment settings, and in some cases, the criminal justice system. Expulsion also can have a significant negative effect on the families. When a child is expelled, families are often left to find immediate childcare, often without support or facilitation from their previous program. Because many young children are expelled due to challenging behaviors, families are often in need of referrals and assistance to secure assessments for their child in order to better understand and possible mental health or medical conditions. Because of this, many young children who are expelled from early childhood programs do not receive adequate developmental assessments. Even if assistance is provided, there is still often a lapse in services that leaves families, especially working families, in difficult situations.
Thank you, Cassie. Thank you, Cassie. So some more facts and statistics about expulsion and preventions in the classroom. The high expulsion rates are, different than the K through 12 settings, with estimates suggesting that 25 to 50% of programs reporting at least expelling at least one child annually. Preschoolers are expelled at 3 times the rate of children in a K through 12 education setting. Black children are 3 times more likely to be expelled or suspended compared to their white counterparts, which highlights a systemic bias within the system. And as we spoke of earlier, it unfairly provides a financial burden for families due to the need for alternative childcare arrangements and the long-term negative outcomes, like we spoke of. The children are 10 times more likely, to face negative educational and social outcomes later on in life, which include academic failure and grade retention, negative school attitudes based off of their, primary interactions with their teachers at a young age. So a lot of them ended up dropping out of school. And then also increased involvement with the juvenile justice system, which includes further future incarceration. So, those early interactions in preschool, are the beginning of a school to prison pipeline, if they're not addressed or are there any interventions that are created. So thank you for watching our series of expulsion and prevention. There will be more to come in this series. Thank you. Please share with all that you feel would need to hear this and talk to your coach if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you.